I came back up Camas Pass on the second to last day of the year with a folded deed in my saddlebag and a plan to be rid of it, and I'll tell you plain at the start, so you don't mistake me for a better man than I was. I did not ride back for love. I rode back to sell. The snow had already begun to mean it. Not the soft kind that pretties up a town for Christmas, but the dry, mean granules that come slantwise and find every gap in a man's coat. My horse, a rangy bay named Cobb who'd carried me 1,100 miles down from the Milk River country, dropped his head against it and climbed. I let him. I'd been climbing toward this moment for the better part of a month, and now that the relay roof showed through the timber, a low sodden shake line against the white, I found I'd have given a good deal to be climbing still. Because I knew what the deed in my bag would do. The Quill River Stage and Freight Company wanted the Camas route closed. They wanted the traffic pushed 20 miles south onto the Dutchman's Grade, where they'd built a toll road and a toll bridge and a hotel that charged $1 for a bed and $2 for a meal. The pass was the only thing standing in the way, and the pass ran across ground my Uncle Ezra had proved up and left to me, the last living thing he had to leave. Sell that ground to the company, and the company would let the relay rot, and the pass would close with the first hard winter, and that would be that. They'd offered me $400. I had $11 to my name and no other prospect on God's earth. So I'd said yes, and ridden up to sign it, and tell whoever was minding the place that they had until spring to clear out. I had not expected the lamp. It hung in the relay window the way it had hung when I was a younger and a kinder man. A brass railroad lantern with the glass kept clean, throwing a square of yellow out onto the snow so a traveler topping the pass in the dark could see he wasn't going to die after all. Ezra used to keep it. I'd assumed, the whole way down, that Ezra's lamp had gone dark with Ezra, 2 years buried. It was not dark. It was burning steady, and a woman came out of the door beneath it with a scattergun broke open over her arm and a coat too big for her, and she stood on the step and watched me ride into her light, and I knew her before she said a word. "A sack Calloway," Junia Vesper said, like she was reading it off a stone. "They told me you were dead." "Folks tell a lot of stories," I said. "Most of them about you." She didn't lower the gun, didn't raise it. She just looked at me, and the years went over her face the way weather goes over a hill, and I'll own that something in my chest I'd thought long dried up turned over once, hard, and lay still again. "Get the bay in the barn," she said. "Storm's not asking permission." I got the bay in the barn. Her father had kept the relay before her. Old Holly's Vesper, who'd lost a leg under a freight wagon and run the station from a chair with a voice like a rock slide. I'd known the family the year I was 22 and broke and breaking horses for the company, before I rode north chasing a wage that always turned out to be 10 miles up the trail. Junia had been a long-legged girl then, quick with numbers, quicker with her opinions, and I had told her one autumn evening by the corral that I'd come back when I had something to come back with. I'd believed it when I said it. That's the worst part of a young man's lies, he believes them. I came back with $11 and a deed to sell the ground out from under her. So she fed me at her father's table because that was the law of the country, and not because she liked the look of me. Beans and a heel of bread and coffee black enough to float a horseshoe. Holly's was 3 winters gone, she told me when I asked, and she'd buried him up on the knoll where you could see the whole pass, and she'd kept the relay because somebody had to. "The company keep you on?" I asked, careful. Something moved behind her eyes. "The company would like me gone," she said. "They've a notion to close the pass, push everything onto the Dutchman's Grade so they can charge for the privilege." She set down her cup. "A family came through in October. Father, a wife heavy with child, 3 little ones, a wagon with 1 good axle. If the pass had been closed, they'd have taken the grade in the snow, and the grade in the snow is where wagons go to be found in the spring. So," she looked at me, "I keep the lamp lit." I thought about the deed in my saddlebag, out in the barn, folded against the cold like a thing that knew to hide. "That's a hard row to hoe alone," I said. "I'm not asking your opinion of my row. But she said it without heat, the way you'd say it to a man who'd ridden far. Then quieter, looking at her hands. I didn't wait for you, Asak Calloway, in case that's what you rode up here thinking. I had a life. I had my father. I had this place and the people who cross it. I lit the lamp for them, not for you. She raised her eyes. I want that understood. It's understood, I said, and was surprised to find it cost me something to hear. The wind took the corner of the roof and shook it like a dog with a rat. She rose and trimmed the lamp and set it back in the window, and the square of yellow steadied out on the snow, and I sat at a dead man's table with a live woman's supper in me, and the cold, honest truth of what I'd come to do sitting on my chest like a stone. I did not show her the deed that night. The blizzard arrived in full before dawn, the kind that erases the world. You couldn't see the barn from the door. You couldn't see your hand if you stretched it out far enough. The pass was shut as surely as if God had laid a board across it, and we were two people and a string of relay horses sealed up in the white with no notion of when it would let go. And then, a little after noon, the bell. Junia had rigged a rope from the gatepost to the relay door, with a cowbell on it, so that a traveler who made the yard in a whiteout could find the house by hauling the line. The bell came faint through the roar, then frantic. She had her coat on before I had my boots, and I went out into it behind her. The two of us clipped to the rope she'd strung between buildings, the cold reaching down our throats like a hand. There was a man on the rope, on his knees, and behind him a horse with a sled, and on the sled, under a buffalo robe gone stiff, a woman and a child. The man could not speak. His beard was a sheet of ice, and his eyes were the eyes of a creature that has stopped expecting to be saved. Junia got under one of his arms, and I got under the other, and we hauled, and the rope burned through my mittens, and we got the three of them into the house and the horse into the barn, and then for a long while there was no romance and no reckoning. Only the brute work of bringing the half-froze back to the land of the living. The woman was the man's wife. The child was their son, maybe 6, and he had stopped shivering, which Junia told me flat was the worst sign there is. She stripped his wet things and wrapped him against her own body under the blankets, and made me build the fire to a roar and heat stones to lay at his feet. And she talked to him the whole while in a low, even voice about nothing. About the horses, about the spring, about a dog she'd had as a girl, not because the words mattered, but because a voice is a rope too, and she was hauling him up it. It took the better part of the day. But along about dark the boy's teeth started to chatter again, and the wife wept to hear it, and the man put his face in his hands. And Junia sat back on her heels with the firelight on her, plain and tired and entirely herself, and I understood, in the way you understand a thing all at once after circling it for years, exactly what it was I'd ridden up to put a torch to. $400 to shut this door. I went out to the barn that night under the excuse of the horses, and I took the deed out of my saddlebag, and I held it up to the lantern and read my own name on it and Ezra's name and the company's name, and I stood there a long while with the cold biting and the deed in my hand, and I did not tear it up. I want to be honest with you. A better man would have torn it up in the barn that night. I was not yet a better man. $11 is a powerful argument, and I had been poor and cold so long that the 400 had grown teeth of its own. I folded it again and put it back. But I'll say this, I put it back the way you put back a thing you're ashamed to be keeping. They were 4 days with us, the family. Drum by name, no kin to the Fairytown Drum, just one of the country's small coincidences. Henry Drum and his wife Cora and the boy, whose name was Wills. They were bound for Cora's brother's place on the far slope, and they'd been told in Drum's Ferry that the Camas relay was finished, the woman gone or run off, and they'd best take the grade. They'd started on the grade. Henry told me this by the fire, his hand still not right, his voice still not right. They'd started on the grade, and the storm had caught them, and Henry had remembered, from a drover years back, that there was an old woman kept a light at Camas, and on a hunch and a prayer he'd cut north for the pass instead. "Old woman," Junia said dryly from across the room, and Cora laughed, and even Henry managed a smile, and the boy Wills, who had decided I was the most interesting thing he'd ever encountered, on account of my spurs, asked me solemn whether I had ever killed a bear, and I told him no, but I'd insulted one once, and he thought about that and decided it counted. I watched her with them across those 4 days the way a man watches whether he can't do anything about. She was no soft thing, Junia Vesper. She was sharp with Henry when he wanted to start out a day too early, and she made Cora rest when Cora wanted to be useful, and she put Wills to work feeding the horses because she said a boy who'd nearly died ought to have something living to take care of. It cured the fright faster than coddling. She ran her relay like her father had run it, by the book and by the bone, and she did it alone, and she did it for strangers, and she asked nothing for it but that the lamp be paid for in lamp oil, which the company had stopped sending in the fall. That's how I learned the company had stopped sending oil. She mentioned it the way you'd mention the weather. They'd stopped the oil and stopped the feed allotment and stopped answering her letters, because the surest way to close a pass is to starve the relay slow and then say it failed on its own. She'd been buying oil out of her own thin purse since October to keep one lamp burning in one window so that men like Henry Drum, cutting north on a hunch and a prayer, would have something to cut toward. I did not sleep much those nights. I lay by the fire and listened to the storm gentle and then quit, and I thought about the $400, and I thought about the lamp, and somewhere in the small black hours of the third night, I stopped being able to think about the one without seeing the other. The morning the Drums left, the sky had scrubbed itself blue and hard, and the pass lay white and silent and passable. Henry had wanted to pay her. He didn't have it to pay her, and she wouldn't have taken it if he had, and there was a small fierce argument about it on the step that ended with Junia putting a sack of cornmeal into the wagon when Henry wasn't looking and Cora catching her at it, and the two women just standing there a moment, holding the sack between them, not saying anything, the way women say the largest things. Will shook my hand like a man and asked could he have a spur. I told him a man should earn his spurs and not be given them, and his face fell, so I unbuckled one and gave it to him anyway because I am not made of stone all the way through, whatever I'd told myself coming up the pass. Junia watched me do it. She didn't say anything. But when the wagon had gone down the white toward the far slope and the brothers' place and whatever life was waiting there, she stood beside me at the gate and said, not looking at me, "That was a kind thing." It was one spur. "It was a kind thing," she said again, in the tone that ended discussion, and went in to do her books. I should tell you about the books. She kept them at her father's desk by the window under the lamp in a hand smaller and neater than any I could write. Every traveler, every horse changed, every pound of feed, 3 winters of it. I picked up the ledger that afternoon while she was out at the barn, meaning nothing by it, and I read down a column and saw it was not a relay's ledger at all, not really. It was a record of people who had not died. There was a line for the Drums already 3 persons, 1 sled, sheltered 4 days weather. There was a line 2 years back for a circuit preacher caught out in October. There was a line for twin sisters traveling alone whom she'd put up a week until their uncle came. There was a line near the front in an older and rougher hand, her father's, that read only, "A. Calloway broke horses, rode north. Owes nothing." Owes nothing. The old man had written it the autumn I left, and under it 2 years later in Junia's small neat hand, a single added word, the ink a different age, returned. I closed the book. I had to. The company man came on the last day of the year. His name was Pell, and he came up the pass in a cutter with a robe over his knees and a clerk beside him and a temper at having had to make the climb at all. I knew the type. I'd worked for the type up north. He had the deed papers in a leather case and a pen and a little traveling inkwell, and he wanted my signature, and he wanted to be back down at the Dutchman's Grade Hotel before dark with the thing done. He laid it all out on Holly's Vespers table without being asked to sit, which told me everything about him I needed. The company would pay $400 for the ground. The relay would be discontinued at the close of the season. The Camas route would revert to wilderness, and the through traffic, He said the word through traffic like it was a kind of prophet and not a kind of people, would be carried south on the improved road, where it could be properly served. Junia stood by her window with her arms crossed and her face shut like a winter door. She had known, the moment the cutter showed in the timber, what I was. She hadn't said a word. She just looked at me once, a long look, and then looked away, and gone to stand by her lamp as if to guard it, and that look was worse than any words she might have spent on me. "You're Calloway," Pell said, finding the line on the paper. "Ezra Calloway's heir. Sign here, here, and at the foot." I looked at the pen. I looked at the $400 that were going to lift me out of poverty and let me ride out of this high, cold country and never feel January in my bones again. I looked at Junia by the window with her back half to me, and the lamp she paid for out of nothing burning steady in the glass. "What happens to her?" I asked Pell. He didn't even look up. "The woman, the position's discontinued. She's free to relocate. We're under no obligation to." "And the pass?" "Closes." He found his watch, glanced at it, put it away. "Mr. Calloway, the light's going if you'd—" "Henry Drum," I said. Pell stopped. You don't know him. Wife named Cora, boy named Wills, 6 years old. They cut north for this pass 11 days ago on a hunch because a drover once told Henry there was a light at Camas. If there'd been no light, they'd have died on your improved road, all three, and you'd have found them in the spring melt and written it up as the weather." I was standing now. I don't recall standing. "That's the asterisk through traffic asterisk, Mr. Pell. That's what closes when the pass closes." "Children in the spring melt." He had the gall to look annoyed. "Sentiment doesn't." "No," I agreed. "It doesn't. So let's not call it sentiment. Let's call it arithmetic." I leaned on the table. "You're offering $400 for the right to close the only safe winter crossing in this country, so you can charge $1 a bed to the people you've left no other road. That's the arithmetic. I've done a deal of low things for money, Pell. I rode north for 10 years chasing a wage. I came up this pass 2 days ago meaning to do exactly the thing you've got in that case. I'm not better than you, but I find," and here my voice did something I didn't plan, went rough and low, "I find I'd rather be poor than be the man who put out that lamp." The room was very quiet. The lamp burned in the window. I picked up the deed. Pell half rose, his hand out, and I tore it. Once down, then across, 4 pieces, and I set the 4 pieces in the stove and shut the door on them, and through the little mica window you could see them catch and curl and go to nothing. $400 and a clean escape, and the whole of my comfortable cowardice, gone up the chimney into the New Year's dark. Pell said a number of things. Most of them concerned my judgment and my future and the company's lawyers. I listened to about half. Then I picked his leather case up off Holly's Vespers table and handed it to him, and said the light was indeed going, and the grade was a long, cold cutter ride in the dark, and he'd best not miss the turn, on account of the only relay he'd find on the way had just gone out of his control. He left, the clerk left, the cutter went down the White and the timber took it. And I stood in the sudden quiet of a dead man's house with no money and no plan and no road out of the country. And I turned around to find Junia Vesper looking at me from beside her lamp, with an expression I had no name for, that I have spent the rest of a long life learning the name of. "That was $400, she said. "I'm aware." "You haven't got $400. You haven't got $4. "11, I said. "I've got 11. She came across the room slow. She stopped a pace off, the way you stop near a horse you're not yet sure of, and she searched my face for the trick in it, because life had taught her there was usually a trick in it, and she found none, because for the first time in a long time there was none. "Why," she said, not a question quite, a demand to be reckoned with. I thought about the easy answers, the lamp, the drums, the boy and the spur, arithmetic. They were all true and none of them was the truth, and I was 41 years old and done, finally and entirely, with the young man's lies. "Because your father wrote owes nothing about me when I done nothing to earn it," I said, "and I have spent 15 years owing him the lie. And because you wrote asterisk returned under it in different ink, and I didn't know what a man could give to be worth that one word, until I watched you haul a froze-up stranger up a rope by talking to him about a dog. My throat was no good for a moment. I rode up here to sell the last thing Ezra left me. I find the last thing he left me wasn't the ground. I made myself say it plain. The way she'd taught me everything was best said plain. It was knowing where the light was. She didn't fall into my arms. I want that understood because she'd want it understood. Junia Vesper had run a relay alone through 3 winters and buried her father with her own hands, and she did not fall into anyone's arms, not even at the turning of the year, not even then. She stood her ground and she looked at me a long while, and the lamp burned, and somewhere down the pass the company's cutter was carrying its arithmetic back to the hotel, and she said at last, "I'll not be rescued, Asa. I don't need a man to keep this place. I've kept it 3 years without one. I know it. And I'll not have you stay out of pity for the lamp, and wake up in March wanting the trail north." "I've had the trail north," I said. 10 years of it. It's a wage that's always 10 miles on. I'm done chasing it." I took my hat off, which I should have done a quarter hour before. "I'm not asking to keep your place. I'm asking to be kept by it. There's a difference, and I learned it about an hour ago, and it's the truest thing I know." The wind had quit. You could hear the stove tick. Outside the window the snow lay blue and the first hard stars were coming, and it was, I realized, very near midnight, very near the turning of the whole year over into a thing not yet written. "The oil," she said. It was not what I expected. "The company won't send oil now. We'll have to buy it. On $11 and whatever we can earn off the relay and the horses, with the company's lawyers coming for the ground." She said asterisk, we asterisk, and I don't think she noticed she'd said it, but I noticed. I have noticed it every day since. "It'll be hard, and it'll be lean, and it'll likely be a fight clear to the territorial court." "I've been poor and warm and ashamed," I said. "I expect I can manage poor and cold and proud." And Junia Vesper, keeper of the Camas Pass relay, holder of the lamp, the woman the town of Drum's Ferry swore up and down was touched in the head for waiting on a dead man, when all the while she'd been waiting on no man at all, but only keeping a light lit for whoever might be cutting north on a hunch and a prayer. Junia Vesper looked at the fool who just burned $400 in her stove, and the winter door of her face came open by some few degrees, and she said, "Well, the year's about to turn. We'd best go fill the lamp." We went out together into the cold to fill the lamp. I'll not make a long business of the rest, the way old men do. We fought the company 2 years, and we won it in the end, in the territorial court at the county seat, because Junia had kept 3 winters of books, and her books were a record of people who had not died, and there is not a judge in any country worth the name who will close a road over a ledger like that. The pass stayed open. The lamp stayed lit. Henry Drum, who'd a brother-in-law who'd a friend who clerked for the court, sent word and a sack of cornmeal back up the line that none of us asked for, and all of us wept a little over. We married in the spring, up on the knoll where you can see the whole pass, with old Holly's Vesper looking on from under his stone, and the boy Wills came back through that summer grown an inch and still wearing my spur, and I gave him the mate to it, because a man ought to have a pair, and because I had at last earned the giving of them. We were lean and we were cold a great many Januaries after, Junia and I would not trade one of them. The relay's gone now, of course. The railroad came through the low country in the end, and took the traffic the way the river takes the snow, and there's no call any more for a light at Camas Pass. But we kept it burning long as there was a single soul who might top that pass in the dark and need to know he wasn't going to die after all. We kept it burning to the last. People ask me sometimes, the few that are left to ask, why a hard old drover who'd give a stranger the spur off his boot ever rode up that pass meaning to put out the only light in the country. And I tell them the truth, which is that I was a poor man and a frightened one, and the money had teeth. And then they ask what changed me, expecting, I think, some grand thing. And I tell them it was no grand thing. It was a woman at a window who'd written one word under a dead man's hand. It was a boy who wanted a spur. It was the plain arithmetic of a light in the snow, and a year turning over into a thing not yet written, and a chance given to a man who'd done nothing to deserve it to finally be worth the word asterisk returned. I came back up Camas Pass meaning to sell. I'll tell you what I did instead. I stayed, and we filled the lamp, and the year turned and turned and turned again, and every turning of it I was where the light was. That's the whole of the story, and it's the best thing I ever did, and I'd not change a frozen mile of it.